Hi, this is Anton with a walkthrough for creating your first pivot table. And most people, and the reason I'm doing this so early is that if you've watched any of my other videos, is that uh, most people have some basic table that they could plug right into a pivot table, basically anything that you use regular charts for, but even still. Uh, so what you do is, and I know some people like to select exactly the cells that they want, but I generally recommend to just select the whole columns. And you need to make sure every column has a name so that uh, Excel knows what the different options are. And then you just go to Insert and Pivot Table. And then you can update these to put it in an existing worksheet, but I like to leave them separate, and I've already selected the range, so that's already done. And click OK. And often what I'll do is I'll build it within the same sheet, and I'll actually move the pivot table out so people could access the pivot without actually accessing the entire data set. Because a lot of times people are viewing the data that shouldn't have access to the data separately. So you start with this blank piece here, your canvas essentially, and you get these chart fields. Now, you basically get to drag and drop wherever you like, and sometimes this can be a little confusing to people, but quite basic. So this is anything that you'd put in here would be something you want to filter the information before it even gets into the table. So say you only want to see people from a certain city, and then from within that city you want to see their postal code or their zip code or whatever. So you would put the city here as a filter, or say you're looking at something that you want to look at months, but you only want to look at certain years, then you would put years here. That's not quite how my data works, but that's the option. And then columns, so anything you want to have down the columns. So let's say you want annual savings there as your columns. So now you see it splits out the columns by annual savings. And then for rows, similar deal, you can put the number, I put the years there, and then yeah, so you can go from there. Now, otherwise I would probably do this, or put the, let me just see, you could put something like this. It's not too useful in this context, but just gives you an idea of what it can do. So yeah, you can drag and drop, and the nice thing is you can actually put multiple pieces. So I actually, in this context, would use this. Now, there's different chart formats that I'll get into in other videos, but it's nice having that aspect. So, but this is actually the chart I would, because my table's so basic and what I'm about to show is quite basic as well. This is the way I would do it. Now, you see it tries to auto sort at first, but the way I have my text formatting, this guy actually belongs up top. And you'll often get blank references. And the quickest way to get rid of it is to just go down and manually remove it. But then anytime you add new options, it'll automatically exclude those as well. So because you've essentially actively included things, so it'll exclude anything else. So generally the better rule is to go into value filters and then go to greater than and just do 0. So anything that's empty essentially will just be ignored. So if you do add new values, it will add them whenever you refresh the pivot. And that's one thing to keep in mind with pivots. You do need to refresh them. There's different rules you can put in, so you don't have to refresh all the time, or you can put Visual Basic Code to have it automatically refresh when there's new entries. It checks different things like that. But generally, I just leave it so that I refresh manually, because sometimes I don't want it to refresh. So that's your standard table. And then the main thing I do with pivot tables is use them as a foundation for a pivot chart. And I often will end up putting the chart in first before I do any of these options, because I personally find these descriptions more helpful once you're in the pivot chart versus the pivot table. The columns, rows, it's kind of meh to me, whereas knowing that this will be the legend, so the color coding, and then this will be the axes, or at least the bottom axis is the best way to put it, that I find more descriptive to people. And then your values and your filters, that's the same. So you get this piece here, and then you will see a lot of people creating dashboards, and I do too, that you put these in different pieces, and you'll have multiple pivot charts from several pivot tables all in the same sheet to make a dashboard. But more often than not, I'm just doing a quick sheet that I'm sharing with someone or that they want to see separately, and say it's a little more complicated so it wouldn't fit on a dashboard or whatever. I often right click, go to move chart, and put it on a new sheet, and then you get a nice full screen. The nice thing about that is if you go to print, it will give you the full screen print automatically. So that can be quite helpful. And then, so whenever you have the pivots selected, or like the pivot chart, as you can see, additional options pop up, and you can play with different pieces here. I can get into those in other videos, but I just want to show the main piece. One thing you will find if your values aren't high enough, that sometimes, and I found this with the older version of Excel, it was worse, where it would automatically go to count, whereas most instances that's not what you want. So the different ways that you generally summarize data, all you have to do is go down here and you can click value field settings, and then there's all these different options. So if you did want count, but that's usually the default, and you can also update the name so it doesn't say count of yours or some of yours up there. You could change that to be whatever you want. It can't be the exact same as any of these others, but you can get around that by just putting a space. So say I did want it to be years, it will give me an error if I hit OK, because that name already exists. But if I just put a space, you can actually get around that. Not exactly recommended, but if it's the only thing you're doing, and it's not really going to hurt anything else, because you can't really reference too far from there. So so that's that piece. And then really formatting the chart works like any other chart, so you don't have to worry too much about that. You can get rid of different pieces, like you can switch row and column like regular charts, and do the standard elements. What was the piece I was looking? So you can, these buttons will actually come out. They're kind of convenient for if you want to do the label filters or value filters, or do the sorting of different pieces. But I often get rid of them because I find they clutter up the piece. So there's just this button here. Generally you want to keep the field list, and you can do the exact same pieces from there. So that's usually what I like to do. And then there's also a refresh piece here. And I think that's all I'll talk about for this one, and then we can get into more advanced pieces in another video.